Nobody saw this coming, not like this. Just when it looked like 21 Savage and Latto had finally stepped out of the rumor shadows and into something real, everything has now reportedly flipped in a way the internet is calling shocking, confusing, and straight-up career-altering. Because according to the latest wave of online buzz and behind-the-scenes whispers circulating through entertainment circles, 21 Savage is now allegedly being removed from major festival lineups after what people believe happened between him and Latto behind closed doors. And the timing? That's what's setting the internet on fire. For years, fans speculated about their connection. Subtle interactions, hidden trips, cryptic lyrics, and carefully avoided questions all built a storyline that the public couldn't quite confirm, but also couldn't ignore. Then came the turning point. Moments where the silence finally broke, where hints turned into something a lot more direct, and where the narrative shifted from "are they or aren't they" into something far more complicated. But now that same relationship is being dragged into the center of a much bigger storm. Reports online suggest that festival organizers have started quietly reshuffling headliner slots, with 21 Savage's name suddenly disappearing from promotional material without explanation. No official statement, no clear reason, just silence, and silence in the entertainment world usually speaks louder than words. Behind the scenes, insiders claim tensions had been building for weeks. Scheduling conflicts, unexpected cancellations, and growing pressure from multiple directions allegedly forced decision-makers into making a move nobody wanted to announce publicly. And at the center of all this speculation sits the same question everyone keeps circling back to: Latto. Because what started as a private relationship rumor has now evolved into something much larger in the public eye. Fans are dissecting every lyric, every appearance, every timeline shift, trying to understand how things went from romantic speculation to industry-level consequences. Neither 21 Savage nor Latto has publicly confirmed any of the claims circulating online, but that hasn't stopped the internet from treating every new development like another piece of a much bigger puzzle. And now, with performances disappearing and questions piling up, one thing is clear. Something changed behind the scenes, and the fallout might just be beginning. To understand how things reached this point, you have to go back long before the headlines, before the rumors spiraled into chaos, and before festival organizers allegedly started making quiet decisions behind closed doors. Because this story didn't start with a cancellation. It started with two artists moving through the same industry, building parallel careers and slowly becoming impossible for the internet to stop connecting. On one side, you have 21 Savage, a rapper whose rise came from a very specific blend of raw storytelling, emotional restraint, and an image that always felt intentionally controlled. From the beginning of his career, he didn't operate like a typical public figure. He rarely over-explained himself, avoided unnecessary attention, and treated his personal life like something sealed off from the rest of the world. That mystery became part of his identity. Fans didn't just listen to his music. They analyzed the silence around him just as much as the lyrics. On the other side, Latto built her career in a completely different but equally powerful way. She came in loud, confident, and fully aware of how the industry reacts to visibility. From talent show beginnings to charting records and viral moments, she developed a public persona that thrived on presence. She wasn't avoiding attention, she was controlling it. Whether through fashion, interviews, or social media dominance, she understood exactly how to stay in the conversation without ever fully giving her private life away. That contrast is what made the speculation between them so magnetic to fans. At first, it wasn't even a story. It was just patterns, shared spaces in the industry. Subtle musical collaborations that made sense on paper but felt different once fans started replaying them. Then came the social media detective work, the kind that only the internet can do. Matching locations, overlapping travel windows, similar visual aesthetics in posts that never directly showed each other, but somehow still felt connected. Nothing was confirmed. Nothing was denied in a way that satisfied curiosity, and that is exactly what fueled it. In entertainment culture, silence is never neutral. Silence becomes a canvas, and fans paint their own narratives on top of it. Every small coincidence became a potential clue. Every lyric was reinterpreted. Every public appearance was slowed down, zoomed in, and analyzed frame by people trying to find something that might confirm what they already suspected. As time went on, the speculation didn't fade, it evolved. Instead of, "Are they together?" the conversation shifted into, "How long has this been going on?" And that shift is where things started to get heavier. Because once a narrative reaches that stage, it stops being about curiosity and starts becoming a full timeline reconstruction. Fans begin stitching together years of content like investigators trying to solve a case that no one officially admitted exists. Then came the moments that intensified everything. Industry events where both names appeared in the same orbit. Song features that reignited old discussions. Interviews where questions were carefully dodged instead of answered. Each avoidance didn't reduce speculation, it amplified it. In the digital age, not answering a question is often interpreted as confirmation disguised as privacy. By the time the rumors reached peak visibility, both artists had already built strong independent careers. That's what made the situation so compelling. This wasn't a case of two unknown figures being linked together. It was two major names whose personal and professional lives were now being constantly merged in public perception, whether they liked it or not. And with that comes pressure from every direction. Management teams begin to get involved. Brand partnerships start monitoring public image more closely. Event organizers become more cautious about narratives that could overshadow performances. Even the smallest rumor can start to carry weight when enough people believe it long enough. In this case, belief became the driving force of the entire situation. What started as harmless speculation slowly turned into a storyline that fans expected to evolve in real time. Every appearance was no longer just an appearance. It was content for analysis. Every silence was no longer just privacy. It was perceived secrecy. And every interaction, no matter how ordinary, became something the internet treated as meaningful. At some point, the narrative stops belonging to the artists and starts belonging to the audience. And that is where the pressure begins to shift from online conversation to real-world consequences. Because in the entertainment industry, perception is not separate from reality. It shapes bookings, brand decisions, and sometimes even scheduling priorities. When enough attention surrounds a storyline, especially one involving personal relationships, there is always a point where the business side of the industry starts to react, even if nothing official is ever said publicly. So by the time rumors of cancellations and lineup changes began circulating, they didn't appear out of nowhere. They felt like the next step in a story that had already been building for years in the background of two very public careers. But what nobody can fully agree on is what actually triggered the shift. Was it internal decisions, scheduling issues, or something deeper connected to the pressure of constant speculation? The internet, as always, has chosen its own answer. And once the internet chooses a narrative, it rarely lets go easily. The moment things shifted from speculation to outright chaos didn't happen on stage, in an interview, or even through a formal announcement. It happened the way most modern celebrity controversies unfold. Quietly at first, inside fragmented updates, blurry clips, and sudden changes in lineup listings that fans notice before anyone in an official capacity acknowledges them. At the center of it all was a growing belief that something had changed behind the scenes involving 21 Savage and Latto. Not just in their personal relationship narrative, but in how the industry itself was beginning to treat their joint visibility. What used to be harmless fan conversation had started to feel like something bigger, something that promoters and festival organizers could no longer ignore. It began with small irregularities. Fans noticed that certain promotional materials were being updated without explanation. Names shifted positions on flyers. Headlining orders changed. In some cases, 21 Savage's name appeared on earlier announcements, but was later replaced or quietly removed without any public clarification. There was no official statement, no press release, no direct explanation from either camp. Just silence, and in entertainment culture, silence often becomes the loudest signal of all. That silence immediately triggered theories. Some believed it was scheduling conflicts. Others pointed to internal negotiations between management teams. But a growing section of online discussion began connecting it directly to the ongoing narrative surrounding Latto and 21 Savage's relationship, suggesting that the personal had somehow spilled into the professional. Then came the first major twist, the alleged backstage tension. According to circulating claims online, a private interaction between individuals connected to both camps escalated into a disagreement that changed how certain decision-makers viewed the situation entirely. While no verified footage or official confirmation exists, the rumor spread rapidly because it aligned too neatly with the existing narrative fans had already built in their minds. It wasn't just a random incident anymore, it felt like the missing piece of a long-developing storyline. From that point forward, everything started to accelerate. Industry insiders, again unnamed and unverified, began suggesting that festival organizers were becoming increasingly cautious about potential disruptions. Not necessarily because of confirmed wrongdoing, but because of perception risk. In today's entertainment economy, perception can be just as powerful as fact. A single narrative dominating social media can influence ticket sales, brand association, and even sponsorship comfort levels. And the narrative surrounding 21 Savage and Latto had become impossible to ignore. The more the internet discussed it, the more it grew. Every old clip resurfaced, every lyric got reinterpreted. Every past collaboration was suddenly analyzed as evidence of a deeper timeline. Even unrelated moments were pulled into the conversation and recontextualized as part of a hidden chain of events. That's when the second layer of conflict emerged. The idea that industry decisions were being influenced not by confirmed events, but by narrative pressure. In other words, it wasn't just about what happened. It was about what people believed had happened. This is where the story takes its sharpest turn. A festival announcement cycle that once would have been routine suddenly became a focal point of speculation. Fans began tracking lineups like investigators. Screenshots of earlier versions of posters were compared to updated ones. Social media accounts dedicated to music news started posting before and after comparisons, fueling the belief that something deliberate was happening behind the scenes. And then came the moment that turned speculation into full-blown controversy: the alleged removal of 21 Savage from a major festival lineup. There was no official press release framing it as a cancellation. No statement addressing scheduling conflicts or artistic changes. Just a quiet update that left fans to notice the absence themselves. That vacuum of information is exactly what allowed the narrative to explode. Because when nothing is explained, everything becomes possible. Within hours, theories escalated. Some fans claimed it was unrelated logistics. Others insisted it was tied to internal decisions influenced by ongoing attention around his personal life. And a more dramatic section of the internet began framing it as something far more serious. A consequence of what they believed had unfolded between him and Latto. At this stage, the story stopped being just about music. It became about consequences. The idea that a personal relationship, real or rumored, could influence professional opportunities struck a nerve online. People began debating whether artists at this level could ever truly separate private life from public career. Others pushed back, arguing that there was no verified evidence of any connection between personal matters and lineup changes. But in viral culture, clarity is rarely what drives engagement. Tension does. And the tension in this case came from uncertainty layered on top of familiarity. Fans already felt like they knew the story. They had been following it for years in fragments. So when something changed, when a name disappeared from a lineup, or when a rumor gained traction, it didn't feel random. It felt like continuation. That is what made this first twist so powerful in the online narrative. It wasn't a single event, it was the feeling that the story had finally moved from theory into consequence. Behind the scenes, both artists continued their careers publicly. There were no confirmed statements addressing bans, removals, or disputes. But absence of information didn't slow the conversation. If anything, it intensified it. The less people knew, the more they filled in the gaps themselves, and those gaps were filled with increasingly dramatic interpretations. Some fans framed it as industry politics, others framed it as personal fallout. A few treated it as part of a much larger entertainment ecosystem where private relationships and public branding constantly intersect in ways audiences rarely see directly. Meanwhile, the narrative around Latto and 21 Savage's relationship itself continued evolving in parallel. What had once been subtle speculation had now become an anchor point for every new development. Every change in scheduling, every shift in visibility, every rumor about performances was filtered through that lens. That's the real engine behind this entire conflict. Not just the alleged lineup change, but the fact that the internet had already decided there was a story here long before any official confirmation existed. Once that happens, every small update becomes part of a larger mythos. And in this case, the mythos was simple but powerful. Two major artists, a hidden relationship narrative, and an industry allegedly reacting to it in real time. Whether that's accurate or not becomes almost secondary in viral culture. What matters is momentum. And at this point in the timeline, the momentum had shifted dramatically. The conversation was no longer, "Is this happening?" It had become, "What happens next?" Once the conversation reached full momentum online, the situation stopped behaving like a normal entertainment rumor cycle. Instead of fading like most speculation does, it intensified layer by layer, until it became something that felt almost unavoidable in music spaces, fan communities, and entertainment news commentary pages. At this point, the narrative surrounding 21 Savage and Latto was no longer just about relationship rumors or festival changes. It had evolved into a larger ecosystem of claims, reactions, reinterpretations, and so-called insider updates that continuously reshaped what people believed was happening behind the scenes. And the more the internet engaged with it, the more unpredictable it became. The escalation began with fragmented updates spreading across social media platforms. Short posts claiming that additional festivals were reviewing appearances, or that internal discussions were ongoing, began circulating without sources or confirmation. These posts didn't need verification to spread, they only needed familiarity. And because the audience was already primed by weeks of speculation, every new claim felt connected to the same unfolding storyline. From there, the narrative jumped to the idea of industry-wide hesitation, not formal bans, not confirmed removals, but a vague, suggestive idea that decision-makers were reassessing how certain artists were being positioned on major lineups. This phrasing became important because it allowed ambiguity to thrive. Nothing was explicitly stated, but everything was implied. An implication is often more powerful than fact in viral environments. As these claims spread, fans began constructing timelines of their own. They tracked announcements, screenshots of event pages, archived lineup posters, and social media edits. Some users even created side-by-side comparisons showing how artist placements changed over time, framing it as evidence of behind-the-scenes disruption. But the key turning point in the escalation wasn't a post or a screenshot. It was the shift in tone. The conversation stopped being curiosity-driven and became consequence-driven. Instead of asking, "What's going on?" people started saying things like, "This is why it happened," or "This explains everything." That subtle change transformed speculation into perceived narrative truth. And once that shift happens, escalation becomes self-sustaining. The second wave of intensity came from reaction content. Commentary channels, live stream discussions, and entertainment breakdown pages began covering the situation with increasing urgency. Titles became more dramatic, interpretations became more definitive, and small rumors were expanded into structured narratives that sounded complete, even when they were built on unverified fragments. This is where the shocking reveal layer of the story began to form. According to circulating online discussion, not verified reports, but widely shared interpretations, some fans began claiming that internal pressure surrounding the public attention on the relationship narrative had reached a tipping point. The idea being pushed wasn't that a single event caused any change, but that accumulated attention itself had become a factor influencing decisions. In other words, the story wasn't about one incident anymore. It was about sustained visibility. And sustained visibility in entertainment can sometimes shift how stakeholders behave, especially when narratives begin to overshadow promotional focus. This interpretation spread quickly because it aligned with how audiences already understood celebrity culture. That perception can shape opportunity. Even without proof, the logic felt believable to many people engaging with the story. But the escalation didn't stop there. The most dramatic phase came when the narrative began incorporating personal stakes more heavily. The focus shifted from festival logistics to emotional framing. Posts started suggesting tension, distance, and unresolved conflict between personal and professional worlds. Again, none of this was confirmed, but the storytelling environment online had already blurred those lines beyond recognition. At this stage, every small detail became fuel. Old interviews were rewatched and reframed, song lyrics were interpreted as coded messages, past collaborations were dissected for hidden meaning. Even timing of appearances was analyzed as if it were part of a coordinated timeline. And because 21 Savage and Latto had both maintained relatively controlled public images regarding their relationship status for a long period, the absence of clear explanation allowed speculation to grow without resistance. That silence became part of the story itself. Then came what many online discussions labeled as the shocking reveal moment. Not a single confirmed disclosure, but a convergence of multiple viral claims appearing around the same time. The first claim suggested that internal conversations within the entertainment ecosystem had become more cautious around joint appearances. The second claim suggested that scheduling changes were happening more frequently than usual. The third claim, far more dramatic in tone, framed these shifts as connected to personal narrative pressure surrounding the artists. Individually, none of these claims carried verified weight. Together, in the eyes of online audiences, they formed a pattern. And patterns are what drive viral escalation. The internet doesn't always need confirmation to build conclusions. It only needs repetition of similar signals. Once enough people repeat a narrative in slightly different forms, it starts to feel structurally real, even when its foundation is entirely speculative. That is exactly what happened here. As engagement peaked, the storyline reached a point where every new post felt like continuation of a larger unfolding event. The idea of 21 Savage being removed from a major festival lineup transformed from a rumor into a symbolic anchor for the entire discussion. Whether or not it was accurate became less important than what it represented in the narrative. It represented consequence, and consequence is what turns gossip into spectacle. Meanwhile, supporters of both artists pushed back against the escalation. Many pointed out that no official confirmation had been issued regarding bans or removals. They emphasized that festival lineups change frequently for logistical reasons that have nothing to do with personal narratives. Others warned that online speculation was drifting too far into assumption-based storytelling. But in viral cycles, corrective voices rarely slow momentum once it reaches this stage. Instead, they often become part of the debate itself. The narrative had now split into competing interpretations. One side believing something significant was unfolding behind the scenes, and another insisting it was entirely manufactured by online exaggeration. This tension between belief and skepticism only added more fuel to the escalation. And through all of it, the original focus, the artists themselves, became secondary to the story being built around them. At the height of the escalation phase, the situation was no longer about confirming truth. It was about managing perception. Every new comment, every reposted clip, every speculative thread contributed to a growing sense that something major was happening, even if no single authoritative source confirmed it. That is the core mechanism behind modern viral entertainment controversies. They don't require a single defining event. They require sustained attention. And once attention compounds long enough, the narrative begins to feel self-evident. By the end of this escalation phase, the story had reached its most unstable point yet. The internet had constructed a version of events that felt cohesive, emotionally charged, and logically connected, even though it was built from fragments, assumptions, and interpretive leaps. And just as the conversation began to feel like it couldn't escalate further, the narrative was about to shift again into something even more reactive, as public response and industry commentary began pouring in at full force. Once the story reached peak visibility online, the reaction phase didn't unfold in a neat or controlled way. It erupted. Instead of a single wave of response, there were dozens of overlapping conversations happening at the same time across social media, entertainment blogs, group chats, and commentary channels. And each space interpreted the situation slightly differently, depending on how deeply they were already invested in the narrative. The most immediate reaction came from fans. For many, this wasn't just another celebrity rumor cycle. It had been building for years in fragments, so the idea that something final might be happening felt like the conclusion of a long-running storyline. That's why reactions were so divided. Some people treated the situation as entertainment, analyzing every update like chapters in a series. Others reacted emotionally, defending the artist involved and pushing back against what they saw as unnecessary speculation. A large portion of online discussion focused on the idea of fairness. People questioned whether it was appropriate for personal relationship narratives, confirmed or not, to influence how the public interpreted professional decisions. This sparked debates about boundaries in celebrity culture, especially in an era where every detail gets amplified and recontextualized within minutes. On one side, supporters argued that artists are constantly under scrutiny and that public curiosity is unavoidable when fame reaches a certain level. On the other side, critics pointed out that constant speculation can distort reality, turning normal career fluctuations into dramatic storylines that may not exist in any official form. But regardless of stance, everyone was talking about it. Entertainment commentary channels quickly amplified the situation. Some framed it as a major turning point in both artists' careers, while others took a more cautious tone, emphasizing that lineup changes and festival decisions are common in the industry and rarely tied to personal narratives in the way the internet assumes. Still, even the more cautious coverage couldn't escape the gravitational pull of the story. Once a narrative gains momentum at this scale, even neutral reporting begins to sound like confirmation simply because of how frequently the topic is being discussed. Industry reactions, meanwhile, were far more restrained, but still noticeable in tone. Promoters and event organizers generally avoided direct commentary, which is standard practice in situations involving speculation. However, in entertainment circles, silence is rarely interpreted as neutrality. Instead, it often gets read as strategic distance. That perception alone was enough for fans to build theories about behind-the-scenes caution, even without any formal acknowledgement. Some booking discussions, according to unnamed online claims, were said to be more careful about aligning narratives when scheduling high-profile performances. But again, none of this was officially confirmed. What mattered more was that audiences believed it could be happening, because it fit the larger story they had already constructed. Meanwhile, music industry commentators began discussing a different angle entirely: the impact of narrative saturation. When a story dominates online discussion for too long, it can begin to overshadow the work itself. That means every appearance, interview, or performance connected to the individual's involved risks being filtered through the lens of the dominant narrative. In this case, the relationship speculation and alleged fallout had become the primary lens through which everything else was being interpreted. That shift changes how audiences engage with artists. Instead of focusing on music releases or performances in isolation, people begin associating them with ongoing storylines. That can amplify attention in the short term, but it can also create pressure for the individuals involved, because their work is no longer received on its own terms. Social media influencers and commentary pages leaned heavily into this dynamic. Reaction videos, breakdown threads, and live stream discussions framed the situation as a cultural moment rather than a simple rumor. The tone varied. Some were analytical, others sensational, but the effect was the same: sustained amplification. As engagement grew, so did polarization. Fans of 21 Savage and Latto often found themselves defending their preferred artist against interpretations they disagreed with. Some pushed back against the idea that any professional consequences were tied to personal matters. Others focused on emotional narratives, interpreting the situation as a reflection of relationship complexity rather than industry mechanics. This division kept the conversation alive longer than usual. One of the most striking aspects of the reaction phase was how quickly older content resurfaced. Interviews from previous years were clipped and reposted with new captions. Song lyrics were reframed as commentary on the present situation. Even casual moments from past events were reanalyzed as if they contained hidden meaning that had only now become relevant. This retrospective reframing is a common feature of viral controversies. Once a narrative takes hold, the past is rewritten in real time to support the present interpretation. And in this case, that process made the story feel even more layered than it actually was. Meanwhile, some media outlets attempted to slow the narrative down by emphasizing what was not confirmed. They highlighted the lack of official statements regarding bans or removals, and reminded audiences that festival lineups often change for logistical, contractual, or scheduling reasons that have nothing to do with personal relationships. But those clarifications struggled to compete with the emotional weight of the viral narrative, because emotionally charged stories spread faster than factual corrections. Another key reaction came from neutral observers, people who weren't necessarily fans of either artist, but were drawn in by the scale of the conversation. For this group, the situation became a case study in how quickly modern entertainment narratives can escalate. They pointed out how easily fragmented information can form a seemingly complete story when amplified across platforms. This group often described the situation less as a scandal and more as an example of digital storytelling in action, where audiences collectively construct meaning from incomplete information. By the time reactions peaked, the story had reached a strange dual existence. In one version, it was a developing entertainment controversy involving potential industry consequences, relationship speculation, and behind-the-scenes tension. In the other, it was a social media-driven narrative built on interpretation, repetition, and emotional engagement, rather than confirmed facts. Both versions existed at the same time, and both were being discussed with equal intensity in different corners of the internet. That duality is what made the reaction phase so powerful. It wasn't just about agreeing or disagreeing anymore. It was about which version of reality people were choosing to engage with. As discussions continued, attention gradually began shifting toward the next logical question. If this situation had escalated this far publicly, what would the final outcome actually look like? And that question set the stage for the final phase of the narrative, where speculation turns into closure or into something even more unresolved. Just when the conversation seemed like it might finally settle into routine speculation again, the narrative took a turn that shifted everything into a more uncertain, high-stakes direction. The online discussion had already been stretched across weeks of theories, reactions, and reinterpretations, but what came next didn't reduce the tension. It amplified it. Because instead of clarity, the situation delivered something far more destabilizing, ambiguity that felt intentional. The first sign of the shift came through subtle changes in how the story was being discussed in entertainment circles. Not official statements, not direct confirmations, just a noticeable cooling in the way the topic was being referenced by certain commentary spaces that had previously been very active. Where there had once been constant updates and rapid speculation, there was now hesitation gaps. Short pauses in coverage that didn't go unnoticed by audiences who had been following every development closely. And in viral culture, hesitation often feels like information. Almost immediately, that silence was filled with interpretation. Some believed it suggested internal resolution behind the scenes. Others felt it indicated something still unfolding privately that had not yet been made public. Neither interpretation could be verified, but both gained traction because the audience had already been conditioned to expect hidden layers beneath every pause in communication. Then came the moment that reignited everything. A new wave of online claims began circulating, suggesting that the situation involving 21 Savage and Latto was not as settled as some had begun to assume. These posts didn't introduce new confirmed facts, but they revived older threads of speculation and presented them as if they were part of an ongoing development rather than past discussion. This is where the narrative's final twist began to take shape. The idea that the story was still evolving, just not in real time on public platforms. Suddenly, everything that had seemed like fading attention snapped back into focus. People revisited earlier moments in the timeline with renewed intensity. Past festival discussions were re-examined. Old interview clips were resurfaced again. Even previously dismissed rumors were brought back into circulation as if they had regained relevance. The story wasn't progressing forward anymore. It was looping back on itself, reinforcing its own mythology. And that looping effect created a powerful illusion that something unresolved was still waiting to be revealed. At the same time, discussion around the alleged festival situation took on a different tone. Instead of focusing on whether 21 Savage was confirmed or unconfirmed in any lineup changes, the conversation shifted toward what it would mean if such changes were part of a larger pattern. Theories expanded beyond individual events and started framing the situation as part of a broader restructuring of appearances, branding, and public positioning. But again, nothing concrete was ever introduced. What changed was perception, and perception, once fully formed, is difficult to reverse. The most dramatic part of this final phase wasn't a new development, it was the absence of resolution. The narrative reached a point where audiences expected either confirmation or denial, but neither arrived in a definitive way that closed the loop. Instead, they were left with fragments. Partially explained moments, unanswered questions, and interpretations that continued to circulate without an anchor. That lack of closure created the cliffhanger effect. In storytelling terms, this is the moment where tension is held without release. But in real-world viral narratives, it feels less like a writing technique and more like an ongoing situation that hasn't finished unfolding. That distinction is what keeps audiences engaged even when no new facts are being added. Meanwhile, both 21 Savage and Latto continued their careers in the public eye without directly addressing the circulating claims in the way the internet expected. Appearances, performances, and professional commitments continued, but the online narrative had already separated itself from day-to-day reality. In the public's mind, two parallel stories were now running simultaneously: the official world of music releases and performances, and the constructed narrative built through speculation and interpretation. And those two worlds rarely aligned perfectly. That gap became the space where the cliffhanger lived. Because as long as there is a gap between what is officially known and what is widely believed, the story remains open. The final twist, then, wasn't a revelation in the traditional sense. It was the realization that there might not be a single moment of closure at all. Instead, the situation had evolved into something more fragmented, an ongoing narrative that could expand, shrink, or reappear at any time, depending on what new content or rumors entered the cycle. And that uncertainty is exactly what kept the conversation alive. By the end of this phase, the most discussed idea wasn't what had happened, it was what could still happen. Would there be a clarification, a denial, a confirmation of any of the claims circulating online? Or would the entire situation remain permanently in the space between speculation and silence? That unanswered question became the final hook, because in this story, closure was no longer guaranteed. And just like that, what started as whispers turned into one of the most talked about music industry storylines of 2026. Because this isn't just about a relationship anymore. It's about how private lives in hip-hop don't stay private once fame, fandom, and social media all collide in the same space. One moment, two artists are carefully dodging questions in interviews, and the next moment, the entire internet is building timelines, decoding lyrics, and connecting dots that may or may not even belong together. What makes this situation so intense is how quickly the narrative shifted. At first, it was just speculation, a few posts, a few collaborations, a few they might be together comments online. Then it turned into full-blown detective work. Then it became confirmation. And now it's being framed as consequences, bans, industry fallout, and permanent changes to how both artists move in public. But here's the part people keep debating. Where does reality end and internet storytelling begin? Because in situations like this, perception moves faster than facts. A rumor becomes a headline. A headline becomes a report. And before anything is officially confirmed by the people involved, the internet has already written 10 different versions of the ending. Still, what's undeniable is the impact. Fans are watching every move. Every appearance gets analyzed. Every absence gets questioned. Every post turns into a clue. And every silence gets interpreted as something deeper. For 21 Savage and Latto, the spotlight is now permanently different. Even if they step away from the noise doesn't step away from them. Their careers, their music, and even their performances will now be viewed through this lens, whether they want it or not. And that's why this story isn't really finished. Because in entertainment, the final chapter rarely comes when people expect it. Sometimes the real twist comes after the cameras move on. Sometimes it comes in an interview months later. Sometimes it comes in a lyric, a documentary, or a single unexpected post that changes everything again. So the question now isn't what happened, it's what happens next. Will they address everything directly and shut the speculation down once and for all? Or will the silence continue, letting the internet keep writing the story for them? Either way, this isn't fading anytime soon. And if there's one thing we've learned from this entire situation, it's this. In today's industry, the story doesn't end when the truth comes out. It ends when the audience finally decides to move on.